We have here just a few weeks ago, we have the Washington Post, many different media outlets reported on this, how the Latter-day Saints came to back Senate's same-sex marriage bill. Same-sex marriage, long a divisive issue, could be what brings Americans together, said Troy Williams, executive director of Equality Utah. So sodomite marriage is what he's saying is what's going to bring us together. How is sodomite marriage going to bring people together? Bizarre. So that bill is not what it seems. What it's proposing to be is a bill that repeals the Defense of Marriage Act, which said that the federal government could not recognize sodomite marriages. So it repeals that, and then it says that equal protection clause of the Constitution says that if California legalizes a marriage, that every state now has to recognize that marriage. And so what's interesting, though, is in the legislation itself, every marriage, so except for plural marriage, has to be recognized. That's the one exception in the bill, which I find fascinating. But we won't go into that. But it just goes in there and says if a state says that two guys can get married, or two girls, or a man and a minor, or any of those types of things, if they recognize that marriage, where we've seen lots of different examples of different places recognizing marrying a robot, somebody even married a hologram. Those types of insanities, right, is now Utah, according to this legislation.
Someone just married their phone.
Yep, somebody married their phone. Yep. Now we would have to recognize that and support that. In fact, there are lots of sodomites in China. There was an article about this that are getting married online because via Utah. Utah will marry a Chinese couple in China that aren't even residents of Utah because China won't do it. We know what California, New York will do. And so now this bill would, if the legislature, which they won't nullify it, will become the law in Utah. And so that it's not what it seems. So this bill, it would impact not only how religious institutions function, because it claims to give a carve out exceptions to religious institutions. So again, some animals are more equal than others. As an individual, you're not protected, but this church would be, but not necessarily actually, when you look further into the legislation. They even be afforded to do so because of lawsuits and threats of lawsuits. They won't be able to continue to offer their services in the community because, for example, you have churches, they have different corporations that do different things, such as adoptions or charity work, thrift stores, or different things like that, where if that's, like DI, for example, doesn't hire a tranny under this bill, then they could be sued. Or if they don't adopt out, you have some kind of Christian adoption agency and they don't adopt to sodomites, they would be shut down because they're not a church. They don't get those same protections. And here's an example of a religious school or adoption agency that desires to act in accordance with its belief that marriage is between a man and a woman would be subject to losing its tax-exempt status or their license to operate under this bill. And so we have to ask ourselves why. There's lots of different things that are going on, not just the sodomite agenda. All at the same time, we have these different cultural movements going on, from the sodomite to the smash the patriarchy to the anti-racism movement. We have the Deseret News coming out with this article just earlier this year, says that the 5 men who are championing women in leadership. When you go to a women's leadership conference, you don't expect to see men, but that's exactly what happened here. We went over this a few months ago in training about the desire for the conspiracy to remove the mothers from the home, and so they can increase the tax revenue, as well as remove a parent from the home and be able to have more control and direction over the children. So we have this one. So we have NPR saying not racist is not enough, putting in the work to be anti-racist. Okay, so they're putting forward this idea that not only are you not supposed to, burn crosses and wear a white hood, but you've got to go one step further and be anti-racist. And what that means is, well, I'll cover what that means in a second with another one of these. So you've got Prince William. He says that racism has no place in society. So they're trying to shut people down. We have this one where California passed a legislation that requires corporations to have a woman on their corporate board, which kind of begs the question, if they're not going to be transphobic, if they're not going to be transphobic, then what if I identified, I was already on the board and I'm a man, identify as a woman because of this bill, identify as a woman, and now that meets the requirement. I don't know. We have another Utah Magazine article. It says the time for gender equality in the workplace is now. And the way that you do that is provide specific career pathing and growth for women at your organization. So like reverse racism, this is reverse sexism. Hiring and promoting more women in senior executive positions is important. Providing clear career pathing helps all. So here we have what does it mean to be anti-racist? She says learning to uplift non-white voices, even those who may disagree with you. So somebody that's not white out there, this is how you don't agree with them. You think that they're wrong, but because they're not white, you have to promote what they're saying. Otherwise, you're not anti-racist. And then we have here, continuing on, it says, if you have a sexual preference that discriminates against transgender men or transgender women, you are transphobic. So if you are a man and you want to date a woman, a biological woman, then you are now, an evil bigot. And then you have, this article's out there. It says, is it discriminatory to refuse to date a trans woman? So that's the agenda that they're putting out there, right? Why are they doing these things? I mean, it's just madness, obviously madness. So why we need to ask ourselves, why the obsession to quote unquote smash the patriarchy, right? To be anti-racist, to end homo or transphobia. Okay. And then what happens when this becomes a part of public policy? We're starting to see this. When you start to see where a state says that you have to have a certain gender in certain positions, when you have to promote ideas that you don't agree with because somebody of a different race is saying it. If you don't date someone because they're the same gender as you, that you're evil, okay? And even beyond that, now we start to see this in hate crimes legislation, or when they're forcing you to associate through employment or housing, okay? And so this idea, now they're trying to demonize the idea of discrimination, but we need to understand that laws by their nature discriminate, right? They pick people that are murderers and they discriminate against them and they put them in prison. If you're a burglar, they discriminate against you and they put you in prison, or or if you're assaulting someone, they discriminate against you. It's interesting how, things that used to be illegal are now legal, and now not only not illegal, but now being shoved down your throat is you have to accept and adopt, or otherwise you're the bad guy. And so if we apply those same things here, we can start to see how radical and in how the agenda of these three social propaganda machines, programs, are not being honest. It's not just contradictory, because then you would see some kind of a consistency. It's a lie. They're not about that. We show that we did this in another training in one of my articles, where you have a sodomite activist talking about how they're lying about how sodomite marriage won't affect the institution of marriage, and that they know that they're lying when they say that it won't affect it. They know what they're doing is deceptive, and they're gaslighting you into thinking that it's only about not discrimination. But we understand that discrimination is a part of our lives and it's a part of the law. And so, but what anti-discrimination laws right now, what they do is they control conscience. That's what it's about, is controlling your conscience and your beliefs and your property, right? We look at these things with the tranny book reading to children. If you're going to say that you can't discriminate, that means you have to associate and bring your children to immoral venues. That we're not going to discriminate, so we're going to have meth heads hang out with our kids. What these things do is they use the force of government to go against your conscience and what many people believe on a scriptural level of what they should be doing with their lives. Anti-discrimination laws destroy scriptural morals as well as familial and cultural stabilizing norms. That's what these things that I've discussed tonight are really all about, because they have to destroy these norms of stable society to be able to build up their new world order. It's not just about legislation and having control over your banking and control over your housing and control over your, the way you travel. It's about destroying those things that keep a nation stable so that they can just move in and build up their power. And so we need to understand that government has zero authority to control conscience, and it has zero authority to force associations, right? Whether it means they're going to penalize you for not associating, or they're going to incentivize you to associate with people they want you to, that you may not want to. They have no authority to do so. And as individuals, what we must do is allow others the freedom to their unpopular beliefs. But also we need to separate from those that would attack our values through forced association or other means. Meaning somebody else has a view, they want to do something different than you. You can't use government to stop them, but that doesn't mean you have to associate with them. And that's what I've talked about before, of the principle of separation and of independence. People in a society and a culture have to have like values. Otherwise, that culture, what we see now today, will be at war with each other. And so just because you're allowing them to do something doesn't mean you should associate with them, either in your personal life or culturally or even geographically and politically. But what the conspiracy wants to do is to integrate those two ideas together. And so they force you to associate with people that you might not want to.